about this. We create community, use challenge as the catalyst.
The trust breeds magic.
We're going to connect on the same level.
Possibility is bigger than they imagine.
Like any experiment, the reason you do it is to learn.
Who would you be without opportunity?
The learnings of this experiment are going to be on the edge of what's possible.
Everybody!
I can do this, and it's worth doing.
This became a love for us, this place.
I honestly, since that happened, I've never been introduced without it, and now I'm just accepting that that's never going to go away, is it? It's incredibly embarrassing. So I'm glad the Buried Life guys spoke first, because they swore a bit, and that's kind of my MO. When Duke and Anna called me about doing this, I'd actually talked with Penny about this, and she works with the Buried Life guys, and told me about this, and I was like, man, that's something I really want to be a part of and check out and experience. And then right then, Duke and Anna called me, and I was like, hey guys, how's it going? And they were like, hey, yeah, really interested in maybe having you speak at this thing. And I was like, I have no idea what I'm gonna say, but that's awesome because it's an excuse to be there. So hopefully, if you guys take anything from this, I'll actually be amazed. But this is my life story, and I'm just gonna talk through it. I read through the do's and don'ts of do, and one was don't rehearse it. And so this is just kind of winging it. How many people know what a first descent is? That's fantastic. It's not an Eddie Bauer brand, that's first ascent. We just filed a federal lawsuit and everything's settled. We're very different, okay? First descent is the first time someone kayaks down a river. And that was really my career. So to back up a bit, I had a pretty normal upbringing, raised in Northwest Montana. My dad was a doctor, my mom was a stay-at-home mom. Nothing too exciting, crazy, or different until I was 9 years old. And then my life drastically changed. My parents bought me my first kayak, and I think they've regretted it since. This was actually the first day that I ever used that kayak. This is on McDonald Lake in Glacier National Park, and we kayaked the outlet of that lake, which is called McDonald Creek. And I was horrified, but I was also really intrigued. Right away, as you can see, I had great camera awareness. I knew exactly where it was at all times. While still paddling downstream, I could wave effortlessly. It's horrifying, isn't it? Young kayaker in the making, and so at that time, I knew that this was something I had to do. It wasn't even like a choice. There were no professional kayakers at the time. I'm not sure there really are still. And so it wasn't like being a football player, right? It wasn't this obvious path where someday I was going to do that. I just really enjoyed kayaking. And then something interesting happened in my life. This was sort of the next big pivotal thing. When I was 13, my parents did something really unconventional. And they sent me on a rite of passage, which in a lot of cultures, this is a pretty normal thing, right? You send your kid away, or in some way they experience this transition into manhood. And so my parents sent me for a week into some mountains outside of Vail, Colorado. And I honestly had no idea what was going on. They wouldn't tell me. They just said, you're going away for a week. And I was like, well, sounds good. I hope I come back. And over the course of that week, it was really, honestly, it's kind of like Lord of the Flies in hindsight. It was like we were unleashed into the wilderness, 7 young boys, all 13, and kind of found our way. And at the end of it, sort of our mentor on that trip sat us down and said, you guys, you're adults now. And your parents know this about you. They knew this about you coming here. And that means as an adult, you can do whatever you want, but it also means that you're responsible for your actions. And so the first thing I did as an adult, which was what any 13-year-old boy would do, is I asked the mentor to buy us some pornos. I'm not kidding. That was literally the first thing I did, because I was like, I'm going to test this theory. Well, it turns out I was an adult, and I got my pornos. And I went home and my parents sat me down and they said the same thing. They said, well, Brad, do you realize what just happened? And I was like, I was still kind of like in disbelief. I was like, I don't believe you guys. I do have my pornos, but that's it. And so I was like, I'm not sure if I do. And they said, you can honestly do whatever you want. And we have no rules around that. These are your decisions now. And this is your life. And so they said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to start traveling internationally and paddling. And I think they were just like, it's not what we meant, but they couldn't say no, right? So I had my pornos and I set off around the world. And the first place I went was Chile, and I spent some time down there paddling and training. I actually started picking up sponsorships when I was 14, making enough money to kind of fuel that fire and keep going and keep gas in the tank, so to speak. And then 5 years later, I came to a really cool place in my career. I had traveled to 20 countries at that point. I was actually sponsored to paddle. I was on the cover of Outside Magazine. I was Nike's first sponsored kayak athlete, which is phenomenal. I always wanted to be a Nike athlete. I have no idea how that happened. And I was really living this dream, right? From that time I was 13, I was told I could do anything. I was doing exactly what I wanted to do, and I didn't question it. Before I get into that, people still, no matter how often I describe it or how much I tell them or show them, people don't really understand what I did, like within kayaking. I didn't do an Olympic sport. I didn't compete much. What I did were these first descents, right? What I told you in the beginning. And so here's a quick short video about that to give you a better idea of it. So that was, obviously it requires a lot of intelligence. So, my parents ever more regretting that decision to teach me. So anyway, I followed this passion, right? And it was really amazing. The one thing I loved about kayaking is it really brought me into a place of presence, right? Which I've really struggled to find outside of it. This rapid is an interesting rapid. It's called the Minas Rapids. It's a set of rapids on the upper Zambezi, and in the background you can see Victoria Falls is that kind of white cascading area, and then Zimbabwe on the left of the screen and Zambia on the right. And it's a really dangerous rapid. I'd actually traveled there 3 times to run this thing, and the first 2 times I turned it down, and the 3rd time I went for it. And I remember paddling into this rapid, and as I was entering it, I was in a really bad space, and I asked myself, who's going to tell my mom I died? And immediately I was like, that's not gonna work. And so I focused, I just let it all go, I focused, and actually the sounds and the voices and the noises all disappeared, and as I paddled into that rapid, right before this picture was taken, I just remember all I could hear was my heartbeat, and it was slowing down, and it seemed like time was slowing down. And it was that present moment that I soon discovered I was really chasing that sense of presence. Like, what an amazing feeling. And that'll be relevant here in a few minutes. When I was 18, shortly around the time this picture was taken, I came to a crossroads, which is a pretty normal crossroads, right? I was 18, and I was deciding between college and careers over here, or pursuing this life and this path that I was on. And so I graduated high school a year early, thinking that would help. I'd take that year that was supposed to be my senior year. I would travel around the world, get it out of my system, and come home and go to college. And my parents, I remember I had this amazing world tour. I came home, and my parents were like so excited to sit me down and hear about the trip, but more so, my dad just wanted to ask where I was going to college. And I was dreading this moment. And so we sat down, and he said, oh, where are you going to college? And I said, Dad, about that. I said, I'm actually not going to college. And, oh, man, yeah, it went over like a fart in church. He was just like, I'm sorry, what? You're not? And I was like, no, Dad, I'm not going to college. And he was like, oh, yeah, it's great, Brad, real great. What are you going to do with your life? And I was like, well, I've thought a lot about this. And he's like, oh, I can't wait to hear this. And I was like, I want to start a nonprofit. And he was like, that's it, I'm out. Like, he's your son, Ginny. And so that took a while for him to chill out about that. He really wasn't that excited. I think in hindsight, he's calmed down quite a bit. So I did. I spent the next 2 years. I wanted to recreate that experience I just described in that rap and that feeling and these experiences of kayaking. I wanted to recreate them for someone else because I truly had thought about, in that year around the world, I had thought about what does it mean to be happy as an athlete. And being an athlete's a really amazing experience, but it's also a really self-centered, selfish existence. And it's very gluttonous, right? You're just feeding off of this amazing time, right? People are paying you to be awesome and do what you love. And I mean, it's kind of mindless, actually. And so I was like, well, wait a minute. Well, how do I make this meaningful to me? And a few years before that decision, my aunt was diagnosed with cancer, and our family went through that with her. It was the first time that anything like that had entered our lives in any capacity. And cancer went from being this word that I'd heard in the periphery to this very direct thing, this very real thing in our lives. And so I thought I want to teach people like my aunt, people with cancer, how to kayak. And so I started this program. And I remember it took me 2 years to get it off the ground, all of the money I had, which wasn't a whole lot. And in 2001, we hosted 15 young adults. So we worked with 18 to 39-year-olds free of charge from around the country, and we taught them how to kayak. And everyone always asks me, how did you find them? How did you find those young adults? And that was a bit of an interesting experience as an 18-year-old walking into medical centers and asking to meet with oncologists and telling them I wanted to take their patients whitewater kayaking. It was like, hey, dude, bro. Like, my vocabulary was super strong at this point. And these guys were just like, and I hadn't learned, like, maybe I should wear a button down. So I had my backwards hat on. And they were just like, dude, buddy, you're insane. I'm not giving you these patients. Like, you're out of your mind. And so it took a while to get that trust. Anyway, so we pulled off this first camp. In those early days, this was like a really scary thing for me. I didn't know how to interact with quote unquote sick people. I wasn't sick. Were they going to judge me or think that I wasn't being very true to myself or to them? And so it was a really scary time for me. Right around the time of that first camp, I don't know what I'm doing in that photo. In that car is a whole different story. But anyway, right around the time of that first camp, I had this really chance interaction, this meeting with this young guy named Sean. And so I was really new on the scene of this cancer thing. And I'd made one friend in the cancer world who trusted me because her husband was a NOLS instructor, so she kind of got it. And she was the one really funneling patients our way. And she called me up one day and said, hey, Brad, I've got a kid you have to meet. And I was like, great. And what's the deal? And she said, well, I was walking, he was inpatient. I was walking by his hospital room, and I saw out of the corner of my eye a kayak film in his room. And so I ran in there to see what that was. And it was you were kayaking. And so I was so excited to say, I know that guy. And he couldn't believe that I knew you, which I can't believe anyone couldn't believe that they know me. I was like, that makes no sense to me. But this kid was excited. Sean was excited. And she said, he's too sick for your program this summer, but I want you to get to know him. So I drove down there. Sean and I became fast friends. As you can see, Sean's on crutches. While Sean was in the hospital, he told me his dream was to get this robin egg, is what it's called, blue Wave Sport Easy, which is a make and model of a boat. And he called me and said, hey dude, I want this boat. And I was like, stand by. So I called the owners of Wave Sport. I got this boat ordered and everything was great. And then he called me back and he said, hey, they're cutting my leg off. And I was like, whoa, this was news to me. And he said, don't worry about the leg. He's like, I just want to make sure I can still fit in the new boat. So I was like, we'll figure that piece out. And so we did. Unfortunately, by the time he got the boat and he had the amputation, he was still on a downhill trend, not doing really well. And I said, listen, man, focus on your health, get through this winter, and next summer we'll paddle. He called me about 2 months later and he said, dude, got some bad news today. And I was like, all right, well, let's talk. What's up? And he said, the doctors gave me 6 months to live. And I'd never heard that. And Sean and I had actually become pretty good friends at this point, and I was shocked. And my initial reaction, being new to this, was don't listen to that, don't listen to those guys, get a different doctor, ignore that. Unfortunately, less than 6 months later, Sean did die. We paddled that next spring together, but not in the way I'd ever anticipated. His parents asked that I take his ashes in my kayak down the river with him, and then they spread his ashes. I never said goodbye to Sean, and that kind of haunted me. It also sent me on a warpath over the next 10 years to grow this organization and to serve as many young adults as possible. Young adults, there are 72,000 diagnosed in the US each year. Cure rates haven't increased in the past 40 years. It's a population that I think we can all relate to is facing some really unique psychosocial challenges, issues of dating and having kids and starting families, starting jobs, getting out of debt, going to college. These are really big challenges that are compounded drastically by a diagnosis of cancer. And so First Descents over the past 10 years has grown to serve that population. We just finished a quantitative research study that really validated what it is we've been saying for 10 years, and that showed significant relief in areas of distress, areas such as body image, self-confidence, self-esteem. We saw decreased somatic anxiety, general psychological distress. Really big issues are being addressed through multi-day outdoor adventures. And that was really cool. So we've since expanded to rock climbing. We've added mountaineering, glacial mountaineering. We've added surfing. And I think the one thing that we do most of all is we create community, much like we're doing here at Do. We get people together in an authentic way. We use challenge as the catalyst to connect them, and then we let everything else happen normally and organically. And it's been a really interesting journey for me, and if I could leave you guys with kind of one story that's really shaped and changed my life, because I always get, what have I gotten from this? And I unfortunately only have 25 minutes to talk, so I couldn't stand here and tell you all of the things I've gotten. I can say I've gotten all of the good things associated with this disease without enduring any of the bad. Recently, in 2008 actually, and I haven't talked about this publicly, so I'm not sure how this will go, but in 2008, one of our participants, everyone gets a nickname in our program, so I gave him, his name was Nick, I gave him a nickname. Nickname was his nickname. I was really proud of that, okay? So I only know him as nickname, so I call him nickname, and it's like second nature, but I forget that that sounds weird to everyone else. So anyway, in 2008, this young guy, Nickname, comes to our programs. I know, right? Takes a second. And he was 18, and he had just been diagnosed with cancer, and naturally he was really angry. He was really depressed. He had isolated himself from his peer group. He was just not living well. He was a really athletic kid. He was from Utah, a great skier, and he picked up kayaking immediately, and he and I had this great connection. We became really good friends. Over the next 4 years, he and I actually became paddling buddies. Went on multi-day river trips together. He actually climbed the ranks of all of our programming to become a lead instructor at our programs. He went home after his first camp with us, and he started a nonprofit to raise money for cure search for kids' cancers, and then for First Descents, and it has since then raised over $300,000. So all of these amazing things, right? Unfortunately, Nick's cancer didn't go away. And I got the same type of phone call from his mom this time, and it said he has 2 weeks to live. And that was out of the blue for me. I had no idea that was coming. And after my interaction with Sean and not having that chance to have said goodbye, I did something very different this time. I first emailed Nick immediately and said, hey, I found out. I said, I want to come see you. And he wrote back and said, I don't want you to see me. We just hung out like a month before that, and in that time, he was doing pretty well, so that's why this was such a shock. And he said, oh, just remember me that way. That's pretty hard news. You know, it's something that's really hard to get from a friend of yours. And so anyway, I sat down and wrote the hardest letter I've ever written. I wrote a letter saying goodbye to a friend of mine. And that's a practice that shouldn't be because, in hindsight, shouldn't be because he's about to die. Those were all things I should have said to him at some point before then. And I've since written a lot of those letters, not because someone was about to die, but because someone was still alive. Kind of a funny story, after I wrote that letter, Nick passed away. Fortunately, he was still coherent enough to read it when I sent it. And Nick, unbeknownst to me, had planned his own funeral and had asked that I speak at the funeral and I be a pallbearer. And you know, of course, I'm going to do that. That's a tremendous honor. But I was really blown away. And so I drove out to Utah. I stayed the night in Salt Lake City. I got up super early. I put on, you know, the only nice outfit I have. And I drove out looking for, you know, trying to get to this funeral on time to speak. And kind of a funny thing happened, as it would with nickname, is on the way there, I was with my buddy and we got lost. And I was like, this is great. You know, this is the one thing I have to do right now, and I can't do it. I can't get to this funeral. And so I thank goodness, I see this funeral procession parked outside the church, and I'm like, good, we found it. So we pull over, and we go storming into this church, thinking we're late. And we see the coffin, someone's speaking, so we run in, and the whole place stops and turns around and looks at us. And I stop, and I'm like, oh, you know, like, I don't recognize anybody here. And I look over, and I see the picture of the deceased gentleman who was in his late 80s. And then it was my buddy's like, hey, this isn't Nickname's funeral. And I was like, I'm aware of that. And so we kind of like gracefully backed out. And so I enjoyed that because I think that was his last stand. It was his joke to me. We did make it to the funeral, and I did manage to scrape together some sort of speech about how much he meant to me. And afterwards, you know, we're carrying the coffin, and we set it to rest. And his dad walked up and handed me a letter, and that Nick had written to me. And so I guess for me, you know, again, the one takeaway here is just that, you know, being as present as we can, being so present with the people around us, taking time in your life to tell those people that you love them before it's too late. And I think understanding that we will all die, and that's okay, that's acceptable. We may die sooner than we think, so don't get too caught up in what has yet to happen or what has happened, but maybe try to stay present in what is happening. So, thank you guys, appreciate you listening.